not my forte.
Cool. All right. Is that coming through okay? Yeah, cool. Awesome. So thanks for joining me. So my name's Kate Stoker. I'm an accredited practicing dietitian and I am the director and owner of Simply Nutrition Dietitians. I'm going to chat a little bit about us at the start to give you a bit more information in case you need to reach out. But today's topic is nutrition in pregnancy. So firstly, just an acknowledgement of country. Simply Health Group acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and the hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So what we're going to chat about today is about us, what actually is a dietitian and when it's helpful to see a dietitian. When is it important to start healthy habits when you're pregnant? Why is that important? There's some really good research around what women do in pregnancy can make a big difference to their own health and the health of the baby later on in life. The food groups in pregnancy, some key nutrients to have a think about. The food poisoning risk and how to avoid that. Alcohol, and then a question we get asked quite often as dietitians is expected weight gain and how much weight people should expect to gain throughout their pregnancy and then each trimester as well. So a little bit about us. So this is all my lovely colleagues on the screen here. We are a group of dietitians and we have some OTs as well. We are based from Gympie all the way through down into Brisbane, and so we service quite a large area. And dietitians traditionally help people who have been diagnosed with some sort of a disease, as opposed to nutritionists who normally just work around healthy eating. So dietitians are dietitians and nutritionists, but a nutritionist can't be a dietitian. So seeing a dietitian means that you are seeing someone who has at least 4 years of university qualifications to be able to help people with their health. So we learn a lot about the body, how the body works, what happens if there's a problem, how we're going to work around that. So we all love the opportunity to do these sorts of talks because it's about chronic disease prevention, whereas most of the time we spend helping people with a disease. So we always love to try and do some prevention. Thanks to COVID, we also are very good at doing telehealth consultations now, which is great. So you can access dietitians from the comfort of your home, or we talk to lots of people at work on their lunch break as well. And that's now rebatable through Medicare, which is great. So when should healthy nutrition habits actually start for pregnancy? Do either of you actually know when it's important? Before, yeah. And ideally, it's actually a couple of months before you fall pregnant. So some of the things that happen with a growing fetus happen early on to the point where we actually don't know that we're pregnant. And so it's important that a couple of months before thinking about having a baby, that we actually, sorry, I forgot to click the slides, that we start to think about good nutrition habits so that when the fetus forms, that we've got some good nutrients there to start that process really, really early on. So why is nutrition important in pregnancy? Most people sort of think about just making sure the baby grows nicely. That is probably one of the main things people think about. But we now know that there are lots of reasons why we should start some good nutrition in pregnancy and, as I said, just before pregnancy. As you can see here, this list is quite large, and there are still more things that I didn't put on there that we know now. So there are benefits for mum and for the baby. So the benefits for mum is most people would think about optimizing mum's health, but we know that good nutrition can reduce the risk of pregnancy disorders such as gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, or high blood pressure. It can reduce the risk of any pregnancy complications. Suitable maternal weight gain. So one of the tricky things is that we get told our whole lives to monitor and watch our weight. So seeing our weight go up can be quite confronting. So we're not talking about as well just people gaining too much weight. We are talking about making sure mums understand how much nutrition to gain correct amount of weight. Because when we think about weight gain, we tend to think of just fat mass gain. But we know that in pregnancy, we're actually gaining lots of other things like baby, the placenta, the amniotic fluid, and all of those things are really important for the pregnancy. Improved mental health, and I did a talk last week on the gut microbiome, which is the good bacteria that lives in our gut. We have over 100 trillion microorganisms that live in our gut, and we know now that they play a key role in our overall health. So making sure that we're looking after our gut microbiome in pregnancy is just as important. Improved risk of chronic disease for mum later on in life, maternal growth as well for young mums. So if we have young mums who still have maybe a little bit of growth to do, and we don't just mean heart or weight, we also mean things like brain development, that it's important that we have good nutrition. And increased lactation performance if women choose or wish to try breastfeeding, to make sure we've got some good nutrients there to help milk production. For the babies, we know that there's improved growth outcomes, so low or excessive growth, and we now know that the growth in vitro when they're growing in mums impacts the risk of childhood and adult chronic diseases. It reduces the risk of birth defects. So one of the nutrients we're going to talk about is folate, and folate is really important to close the spinal column of a growing fetus. And so that reduces the risk of things like spina bifida. Improved gut microbiome for the baby, reduced risk of chronic disease, improved brain function, which we know actually does impact behaviour as well. And there's some really good research now around reducing the risk of allergic conditions such as food allergies, asthma and eczema when we have good nutrition when baby is growing. So now you know why, so we're going to talk about how we're going to work on our nutrition. So this is the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. Most people would be familiar with a food pyramid. I do see the food pyramid floating around still, but we've been using the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating in a plate type model for a really long time now. And it is to show the food groups that we should be consuming to get the nutrients that we need to make the organs work. So most people tend to think of our dietary guidelines as just preventing weight gain, but actually as dietitians we spend a lot of time teaching people that it's just about fueling the body effectively and giving the body the nutrients that it needs. So instead of trying to work out how many milligrams or grams or micrograms of each nutrient we need, if we follow our dietary guidelines, then scientists in Australia have done the work for you to just tell you how to eat to get all those beautiful nutrients. And then down the bottom of the chart, you can see our sometimes foods. So there are foods that we eat some of the time. They're not treats, they're not rewards, they're not bad food. It's just sometimes food that we eat for lots of different reasons, including comfort, pleasure, social situations, cultural situations. And these dietary guidelines are on the eatforhealth.gov.au website for anyone to access. We're going to go through these briefly, go through the food groups, and it tells you how many serves that you should be having based on your age, and then we've just got women who aren't pregnant and then breastfeeding because the dietary needs do change. and then on the side what a serve actually means. So if we just go women, pregnant women between the ages of 19 to 50, we should be consuming 5 serves of vegetables in a day. So a serving is half a cup of anything that's been cooked, and that, as you can see from the picture, can come from frozen vegetables. Half a medium potato or sweet potato, a cup of any salad type vegetables or something that's not been cooked. And then we can also utilize tinned veggies. So half a cup of tinned tomatoes, preferably with no added salt. So we can use that in things like a bolognese or lasagna and still count that as vegetables. Fruit, so most people do know the 5 and 2 rule here. You can see it's slightly different in breastfeeding with the veggies there, but fruit, so 2 serves of fruit, and a serve of fruit is a medium apple, pear, banana, a cup of tinned or diced fruit, and ideally tinned fruit that doesn't have any added sugar, so we want to look for the ones that aren't in any syrups, or 2 of the small pieces of fruit, like apricots, kiwi fruits, some of our stone fruit as well. Our grain group, this probably shocks most people, but it's interesting when we're pregnant, we do tend to crave some of these foods as well, and that's our body telling us that it's really important that we eat these food groups because they are the main fuel that our body actually works from. So you can see that there's 8.5, again, if we just look at pregnant women, 19 to 50, 8.5 servings of our whole grain foods within a day. A serving is a slice of bread, half a cup of cooked rice, noodles, pasta, quinoa, barley, all those sorts of lovely grains that we can use. 2/3 of a cup of cereal flakes, or half a cup of cooked pasta there as well. On the side, you'll see that there's also things like muesli, crisp breads, crumpets, English muffins, that they all count as a grain serve. And interestingly, you can see that the breastfeeding is actually higher. So remember, our needs do vary. Most people try and, in an attempt to lose weight, try and cut their food intake down after they've had the baby, but it's really important that we give the body what the body needs to produce the breast milk if you choose to breastfeed. Our lean meats, so and chicken and fish. We also have our tofu and nuts and legumes in that group for our plant-based eaters. So 3.5 serves there. So when we talk about 65 grams, it's cooked meat. So this, about half a palm is about 65, so a full piece of that palm size, which most people are aware of, that's actually 2 serves of cooked meat, sort of the same thickness as well through the palm. Chicken's a little bit more, and then we've got tinned fish and eggs as well. And then finally our dairy serves. So you can see there that the dairy serves remain fairly consistent there from that 19 to 50. Most people would think we need a lot more calcium when pregnant, but we actually don't need, we just need a lot more. We just need to make sure we're getting enough calcium. If people choose to be having the plant-based alternatives that are now available, that's absolutely fine. You'll see down the bottom on the far side of the screen that we just need to make sure there's enough calcium. So things like soy and oat and almond and rice milks don't contain a lot of calcium naturally, so they do have to add it into the milk product. So flick over and look at the nutrition information panel, and we just want to make sure it has at least 100 milligrams of calcium per 100 ml of the milk. It's important to note that any of the barista milks that are great for coffee because they don't curdle, the milk alternatives don't tend to have calcium added into them if they say barista. So always check the back of the packet. What key nutrients? Do either of you know what sort of nutrients we might be thinking about before and during pregnancy? Yep, folic acid, folate. Iron, yep, iron's often a big one that lots of people think about. So some key ones that we would think about that are in those food groups. So if you're hitting those food groups, so you are going to be hitting these requirements, but these are nutrients of particular interest in pregnancy. So we've got folate, iron, iodine, calcium, vitamin B12, omega-3, vitamin D, and also water. So we're going to chat through each one of these. So folate is actually needed to make DNA, which is the building block of life, which is why it's so important that we have adequate folate levels prior to conceiving a baby, ideally a couple of months ahead of time. If there's any family history of spina bifida, lots of GPs or obstetricians actually recommend quite high dose of folate, folic acid, in the lead up to trying to conceive a baby. Some of these as well, a lot of these can be screened by your GP. So going to your doctor before you decide to have a baby is really important because they can check some of these levels and correct any deficiencies before you fall pregnant. So green leafy veg is a really great source of folate. And also in Australia, our food is fortified with folate. If it's labelled as organic, they don't have to fortify, but everything else in Australia, our breads and our cereals have to be fortified with folic acid to make sure that we are getting enough as a population, but it was particularly targeted at making sure women of childbearing age were getting enough folic acid in their diet. Avocado and lentils are also great sources. Our kidney bean, chickpeas, black beans, so the legume family. Bananas, Vegemite does have folate in it. That B vitamin's on the front, so folate is a B group vitamin. So there is some folate in Vegemite. And then we can get supplements. I'm going to talk about supplements in a second, but we sometimes prescribe pregnant women a particular folate supplement if there's a deficiency or a risk of deficiency. There are, for example, certain medications that people might take that we know affect the absorption of folate, and so they might throw in a supplement to make sure we can prevent that. Iron, as you mentioned. So iron is essential for the body to make new red blood cells. And during pregnancy, our mother's blood volume actually increases dramatically, and the baby is making blood tissue as well. So the need for iron goes up in pregnancy. Our main sources that are really well absorbed are red meat. So beef or lamb or kangaroo is also another great source of iron. We can get iron in other forms. So in beef and lamb and kangaroo, it's called heme iron. And we know that heme iron is really well absorbed into the system. Any of our plant-based sources that you can see there, like the iron-fortified cereals, leafy green veg, and our legumes pop up again, and things like tofu, they do have iron in them. It's just non-heme iron. So we know that it's not very well absorbed. So plant-based eaters have to eat a lot more of those foods to get enough iron as opposed to people who eat red meat. We see lots of women who choose not to eat red meat. It just needs a little bit more careful consideration and planning around making sure we're getting that, and then checking the iron levels to make sure that mum and bub are getting what they need. We can take iron supplements as well. Traditionally, iron supplements tend to cause constipation, which happens in pregnancy anyway, but there are some more gentle iron supplements now, and there's a whole lot of iron supplements on the market. So don't put up with it if you are prescribed iron. Make sure you go and chat to the GP, because sometimes they can just simply switch you over to something else. Iodine. So iodine is a mineral that is needed by a gland up in our throat called the thyroid to work properly. And we know now that making sure the thyroid in the mum is working properly actually helps the development of the baby's brain. So it's important that we're getting enough iodine. So we can get iodine in some tinned fish like tinned salmon. But again, the Australian government have made sure that our breads and cereals in Australia are fortified with iodine. So, and they do that because of iodized salt. Again, if it's listed as organic, they don't have to use iodized salt, but our other breads and cereals like your Helgas, your Bergens, they all have to use iodized salt now to try and help. You can buy iodized salt, so if you are going to be adding a little bit of salt to food, then make sure you are using iodized salt. We generally do get enough salt from the processed foods that we eat that we don't need to add any salt. But if you are going to use it, then choose to use iodized salt, which, as you can see there, that's just a Woolies brand. It doesn't need to be a fancy Himalayan salt or anything. It can just be normal salt. Seaweed, you can buy some really cool seaweed snacks now in packets in all supermarkets. So you can snack on seaweed or obviously get it through other things like sushi, but sushi is a food poisoning risk, which we're going to talk about as well. Our dairy foods have iodine in them, eggs, and then we can get supplements. Most of the pregnancy supplements have iodine in them, but iodine is another thing that GPs, obstetricians look out for in expecting mums to make sure that they can supplement it extra if they need to. Calcium, so we talked about our calcium needs don't go up in pregnancy, but we do need to make sure we're getting enough. And there has been a rise in people using plant-based milks, which is absolutely fine. We just need to check the label and make sure that people are getting the calcium, because often I find lots of my patients are choosing a plant-based milk, but they just haven't necessarily thought to check the calcium level on the back. And they tend to be using those barista blends because it doesn't curdle when they add it to their coffee. So our normal cow's milk, yogurt and cheese, particularly our hard cheeses, so Tasty and Parmesan cheddar, are quite high in calcium. And fish with edible bones, so something like tinned salmon that have bones in it, the calcium's actually in the bones, so you have to eat the bones. So it would be obviously crushing them up and making a salmon patty, for example. Or tiny fish where you can't remove the bones, like sardines or anchovies, there's calcium in there as well. And then just making sure that our plant-based milks are fortified. So remember, it was 100 milligrams of calcium per 100 mil of the milk. A lot of the plant-based yogurts and cheeses don't have a great serve of calcium in them. And that tends to be sometimes when we might pop a calcium supplement in. The thing to be really mindful of with calcium is that calcium actually blocks the absorption of iron. So often we find people taking their iron tablets or their pregnancy multivitamins, which are quite high in iron, at the same time as they're having their breakfast cereal or their coffee. And tea, coffee, calcium, unprocessed bran all stop the absorption of iron. So the best time to take iron for most people is with their evening meal, because they're eating veggies at that time and the vitamin C will help the absorption of the iron, and getting it sort of 2 hours away from any calcium-rich foods or any calcium supplements. Vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is also another one to make sure we chat about, again, with the rise of plant-based eating. So vitamin B12 is only found in animal products. So there are people online who will talk about getting it from mushrooms. Mushrooms don't have any vitamin B12 in them. It only comes from animals. So if you're choosing plant-based, including not eating eggs, fish or dairy, it is important that you take a B12 supplement. There's lots on the market, but going to chat to your GP about it. When we have a level of sort of 300, when they do our blood test for B12, that does give us 3 years worth of vitamin B12. But it's important that we get some of those things checked before we fall pregnant. B12 is important for the development of a healthy brain and a healthy nervous system for mother and baby. Omega-3 fatty acids. Oops, sorry, I've got copied that over incorrectly. Omega-3 fatty acids we know are really important for brain development, and we're learning a lot more about the omega-3 fatty acids, and it's really important in pregnancy that we're eating these. We need to be a little bit mindful with the fish intake with regards to mercury. And there are some great on the FSANZ, Food Standards Australia and New Zealand. There's a great table that shows you exactly how much mercury is in fish. But things like our tinned salmon, tinned tuna are absolutely fine if we're having 2 to 3 serves of that in a week. It's no problem. We'd need to be a little bit careful with things like swordfish and flake, which is shark. So just checking boxed packets of fish, or if we're getting fish and chips, just asking them what fish it actually is. So our omega-3 fatty acids are found in really oily fish. So salmon, tuna, herring, mackerel, flax seeds as well. It's found in soybeans, so we can get it in soy milk, chia seeds, and we can buy omega-3 supplements. We get a lot of people really not keen on that very, very fishy fish. So you can get the omega-3 supplements. But again, checking the back of the packets of those. Vitamin D, which most people know we get from the sun, is really important because it helps the body absorb calcium. But there's growing research around the importance of vitamin D for other organ systems, including the immune system. And there is really good research around adequate vitamin D in the mum appears to reduce the risk of food allergies in children, in babies. So it is important that we get enough vitamin D. We have a wonderful SunSafe message in Australia, but we are seeing vitamin D deficiencies because of people doing the right thing and not exposing their skin to the sun. So ideally for lighter skin, we need in the summer only about 7 minutes and about 3 o'clock. It's just because it's outside of peak UV ray time, because we need to not have sunscreen on, and ideally exposing the neck, the arms, the legs and the face to some sun. Another great time is in the morning when we're eating breakfast or having our morning coffee. Instead of sitting inside, sit outside in the garden or on a deck and try and roll up your pajamas and make sure that you're exposing enough skin to the sunlight. In winter, we obviously need just a little bit more, and it is in more the middle of the day. Being a little bit mindful in Queensland that we have a harsher sun, so just be a little bit mindful about it. Often most people get enough by hanging out the washing, going for a quick walk if you've got other kids to pick up the kids from school, but we do need to make sure that we've got that skin exposure. Darker skin tones need 4 times more sun exposure, so we need in summer about 28 minutes and winter about 80 minutes across the day. And as I mentioned, no, we don't want the sunscreen on because that does block the ability of the body to make vitamin D. And don't forget fluids. So as women, we need about 2.1 litres of water in the day. That goes up when pregnant. It actually goes up even more when breastfeeding. So breastfeeding mums should expect to drink anywhere between 2.9 to 3.5 litres of water in a day to get enough. And in pregnancy, we've got here the 14 to 18, 2.4 litres, and 19 to 50, 2.3 litres in a day. And ideally, choosing mostly plain water. When you feel really nauseous, having plain water can make nausea a lot worse. So if someone does have that morning sickness in inverted commas, more like all day sickness, adding a little drop of something into the water can mean that it is better tolerated. So those cold tea infusions are fine, the tea bags, fresh lemon or lime, or a little drop of like cordial or diet cordial. Some of the diet products do have sweeteners in them that are not recommended in pregnancy. And there's some information online about that you can easily access which ones not to be looking for. The traditional ones like your aspartame are considered safe in pregnancy. The Diet Right cordial, which is quite popular, does have a sweetener that we don't recommend in pregnancy as opposed to the Cottee's diet cordials. If in doubt, just use the normal cordial and use it really sparingly if it's only to settle the tummy. So we get asked a lot whether someone should take a pregnancy supplement. The books say as long as we're getting enough of our core food groups and we're doing that all the time in the lead up to pregnancy and during pregnancy, we don't really need to take a particular supplement. But I know, having had 2 children myself, even being a dietitian, is that I took a pregnancy supplement throughout my pregnancies. It just gave me a little bit more comfort that I was adding a bit of extra nutrition into my body. So there are lots of pregnancy supplements on the market, but getting your blood checked will mean that you can get one that's particular for your needs. So for example, the Elevit is really high in iron. So if iron tends to be a problem, putting that one in over something like the Blackmores or the Swiss, which tend to have lower levels. And when we talked about omega-3, a lot of these pregnancy supplements now actually add things like omega-3 into the pregnancy supplement, because we know how important it is. So overall is, you don't necessarily have to take one, but there are lots on the market if it makes you feel more comfortable in taking it, and then make sure your GP is checking your blood so that you can target any particular nutrients that might be lacking. Food safety is a big one that we like to talk about in pregnancy. I find that most people get their food safety information from just talking to other people, which is great, but I thought it might be good to spend a little bit of time on this so that everyone understands exactly what things to avoid, or what things to just be a bit careful with when it comes to food safety. So in pregnancy, our immune system lowers a little bit. So it means you're more prone to actually getting food poisoning. So you might eat things normally and be fine, but when pregnant you might need to be a little bit more careful. And we know that foodborne bacteria actually grow in refrigerators. So most people think if they put it in the fridge that it'll be fine, but they can still grow in that temperature. And pregnant women are 20 times more likely to become infected with food poisoning than other women. And listeria is the most common risk foodborne illness. It can cause obviously really awful gut-based symptoms, nausea, vomiting, flu-like symptoms like cramping. But in extreme cases, it can cause miscarriage or stillbirth. So it's important that we take it seriously. If a mum gets quite bad food poisoning, it can also impact the health of the baby. The baby can get an infection from the food poisoning as well. So how to keep your food safe. So a good rule of thumb is to serve hot foods hot and cold foods cold. Choosing freshly made foods and avoiding foods that are sitting in a bain-marie for a long period of time, even at salad bars. So most people would think that going to a salad bar is a great choice, but we don't know when that salad was cut and how long it's actually been sitting there. Is the refrigeration correct so that it's also keeping the food nice and cool at the right temperature? So if you think about somewhere like Subway or any of those salad bars in food courts, it is sitting out for a long period of time and we just don't know when it was prepared. Thaw food in the fridge. I know that it's quite common to throw like meat out of the freezer and throw it on the bench to let it defrost, but it is best to defrost it in the fridge. So it does need a little bit of forward planning. Pop it on a plate and pop it on the lower shelf. So we also don't want a piece of steak in a Glad bag or a plastic wrap in the fridge and then dripping down on top of the other food. So on a plate, bottom of the fridge, and enough time to just let it thaw in the fridge. If you don't have time for that, which I tend not to, you can defrost it in the microwave. That's fine as well. Cooling leftover food in the fridge. Another really common one is we serve up our dinner and then we go and eat our dinner, and then if you've got other kids, you're dealing with putting them to bed and bath times. You might be getting ready for work the next day and the leftover food is sitting on the stovetop for longer than it should. So if you know that you're going to have leftovers, serving up the dishes and serving up containers at the same time, and the containers, the lids go on and they go straight in the fridge or the freezer hot. So most people think they need to wait for the food to cool down before they put it in the fridge or freezer. It should go in hot with a nice sealed lid to make sure that other things aren't seeping into that food as well. Even better is also getting a little label or a texter and making sure you're writing the date on the top of it. And if you, like me, identify what the food is so that you can come back to it another time. And there are great guides online. If you just use Google, it'll tell you how long lots of different foods should last in the freezer. If in doubt, put it in the bin. Wash your hands with soap and water before cooking, or if you're handling raw meat, then make sure that you wash your hands in between, and not just a little rinse. Make sure you use soap and water and really get it off. Particularly things like raw chicken carry quite a lot of bacteria on them, and it's important that we don't contaminate our other food. Don't eat food past its use-by date. Washing our fruits and veggies thoroughly as well. So when you get them home, it's best just to stand in the sink, have a colander in the sink, and really wash all your fruits and veggies before you pop them away into the fridge. Cooking things really well. So most people would cook things like chicken and meat and fish really well, but lots of people forget about eggs. Eggs carry a really high food poisoning risk, and we all like a nice runny poached egg, but when we're pregnant or at risk of food poisoning, we should cook the egg all the way through, so it should be a firm yolk and white. Reheat leftover food to be steaming hot, so making sure that we are heating it and then stirring it and then putting it back in the microwave and really reheating that food. And then all leftovers, if they've been in the fridge, should be consumed within 24 hours of them being cooked. If it's outside of 24 hours, then they go in the bin. Some key foods to avoid: any unpasteurized dairy foods and soft cheeses, which makes most of us fairly sad. Those foods can be cooked though, as long as they're thoroughly cooked. So you can add things like feta or ricotta into a quiche. As long as the quiche has been really well cooked, then you are actually cooking the cheese as well. Soft serve ice cream, so places like McDonald's, Hungry Jack's, that do the McFlurries or the shakes, Wendy's as well. Some of those places like Wendy's, you can actually get them to put fresh ice cream in it. You just need to have a conversation with the person or say, please don't put any thick shake or soft serve ice cream into that. All pate or ready to eat cold meats. So things like ham and salami or sort of deli meats that, again, we just don't know how long they've been sitting there for and whether they've been kept at the right temperature. So going back to the old cooking up a roast on the weekend and slicing up the meat and throwing it in the fridge or the freezer is the best way to go about that. Those ready-to-eat salads, which we've already talked about, raw eggs, we've talked about raw or smoked seafood, so things like oysters, salmon or sushi. And being mindful with sushi that the biggest risk is the risk is with the raw fish, but one of the biggest risks is actually with the rice. So please be very mindful of cooked rice. It is a very high food poisoning risk. And if you've ever eaten at a sushi restaurant, they tend to make the rice in a rice cooker and it just sits there all day and they're just using the rice. It does carry a high food poisoning risk. Some hummus. You can make hummus yourself with chickpeas, and then things like alfalfa sprouts as well to be avoiding. And then weight gain. As I said at the start, weight gain is probably one of the biggest questions that expecting mums do actually have when they come and see a dietitian, because we are told our whole lives to keep a in inverted commas, good weight, and then seeing weight gain can cause some distress for some people. So these numbers are not set in stone. Every person is going to be really different, and it's really important that we let our body do what it needs to do. And some people gain lots of fluid as well when they're pregnant. So it's not necessarily that it's all just fat mass. There's a lot of things that go into growing a baby. So we do base the weight gain off the starting BMI. It's one of the very few times that we actually use a BMI scale. You can get a BMI calculator, again, just on the internet, that will tell you your BMI, which is your body mass index. Please don't think too much about that BMI scale. It was made over 100 years ago. We actually don't use it that much. In these sorts of situations, we just don't have a lot else to go with because a new tool hasn't been developed. So that's why they still use the BMI. So you can see that we'll look at the BMI classification and then have a look at the weight gain as well. You can see in the trimester one that for all people, there's actually not a great deal of weight gain in that first trimester. It's only 1/2 to 2 kilos across the whole trimester. Lots of people use pregnancy and say, I'm eating for 2. What we should do is more focus on the quality of the food and really trying to make sure that we're giving yourself and the baby what we need to make sure that we have a healthy growth. Trimesters 2 and 3, you can see there that the weight gain is dependent on what the starting BMI is. So it does vary slightly. And then the total, so GWG is gestational weight gain. So you can see there for a single pregnancy versus a twin or a triplet pregnancy that for a BMI category of normal is anywhere between 11.5 to 16 kilos across the whole pregnancy. Again, if you gain 17 kilos, please don't panic. Everyone's a little bit different. It just is a rough guideline. And as I said, toward the end of pregnancy, lots of women do gain a lot of extra fluid and your feet swell up. So it depends on the time of day that you're going to weigh yourself as well. So if you weigh yourself at the end of the day, you could be a couple of kilos actually heavier just because you've got some fluid retention there. Talk to your GP, your obstetrician, or the midwives as well, and they'll help guide you around this. A quick word on alcohol is that their research shows that there is no safe level to drink alcohol when pregnant, and the recommendation is to stop drinking when you think about trying to conceive a baby. Alcohol, these are all fairly dramatic things, but it's really important that we look after the health of the baby and the mum, is that alcohol can cause permanent damage to a developing baby. The unborn baby's nervous system develops very early, and the brain is very sensitive to the effects of alcohol. If you find out you're pregnant and you think, oh gosh, what have I been drinking? Please don't panic. It's just when you find out you're pregnant, just stop drinking at that point. The risk of harm to the unborn baby increases how often the mum drinks and how much the mum drinks. It passes freely from the mother to the unborn baby via the placenta, so the alcohol levels in the mum are very similar to the alcohol levels in the unborn baby. And as I said, to stop drinking when you first start to think about falling pregnant, or as soon as you find out you're pregnant, stop drinking all alcohol. So in summary, eating a healthy diet should start in the 3 months before you start to try for a baby, and ducking in to see your GP to have a chat to the GP about it is really important to get some blood tests done. Eating a healthy diet can improve the health of the mum, but also the unborn baby, not just in the short term, but we now know that it can really impact the health of the child and the mother later in life. If you follow the Australian Dietary Guidelines, that will help you to get all the nutrients that you need. That's why it's been designed that way, to get you enough of that folate and the iodine and the iron. So following that will help you. It can be really helpful for a couple of days just to do a tally of your food groups and see how many you're getting. And then if you see a gap, then you can start to focus on how you're going to get more of that particular food group. And again, please don't think about it from a weight management perspective. We eat the food groups because they have nutrients in them, and the nutrients make our organs work properly. And if it's making our organs work properly, it's making the unborn baby's organs that are develop correctly and work properly. Talk to your doctor or dietitian about whether you need to take a pregnancy supplement. You can obviously always start one and then wait to see the GP and or a dietitian about it. Be extra careful to avoid food poisoning and avoiding alcohol when you start to think about having a baby. That's it. Thank you for your time. Do you have any questions? No. I didn't pop up there like the nausea, constipation and whatnot, so feel free to ask me any questions about that. Yeah, you can have soda water, that's fine. It does have a little bit of extra salt in it compared with plain water. The only thing to be mindful of as pregnancies progress, sometimes women get quite refluxy, and soda water is just adding a lot of bubbles into your stomach. So lots of women get through pregnancy and don't get that reflux, but if you do, then just be a little bit mindful of soda water at that point. Yeah. Tends to be further along in pregnancy, just as the placenta and the baby are pushing up on the stomach, and just meaning that the food's more likely to come back up. No other questions? Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for your time.